The first time I found raw egg dripping down the side of my car, I figured it was just some punk kid pulling a dumb prank. It was a Tuesday night, quiet, cold, same as always. But when I came out the next morning to find another fresh splatter across the hood, I knew this wasn't random. I'm Preston Baker. I work from home as a freelance engineer, keep to myself and pay my dues. I don't throw parties, I mow my lawn, and I even pressure wash the sidewalk every spring. But apparently, none of that matters when you live under the iron grip of the Willow Creek HOA, and especially when your house is on the same street as Margot Simmons. Margot, the HOA's vice president and full-time tyrant, is exactly what people mean when they say Karen. Mid-50s, fake blonde bob, constantly in a tracksuit and always carrying a clipboard she treats like a federal badge. She once fined my neighbor $300 for excessively joyful Halloween decorations. I'd had a few run-ins with her before. She hated my basketball hoop, even though it was removable. She hated my mailbox, which she claimed was an inch too modern. But this egging stuff. This was personal. The third night, another fresh egg, I decided I'd had enough. I installed a motion-activated camera on my front porch and another one in the tree above my driveway. Nothing fancy, just enough to catch whoever was doing this. By Friday morning, I had my answer. There she was on camera at 2:03 a.m. Margot herself, creeping across my lawn in a ridiculous oversized hoodie, hurling an egg straight at my windshield like some deranged teenage delinquent. She even looked both ways before doing it, like she was crossing a street. Then she sprinted back to her house, which was 4 doors down. I stared at the footage in disbelief. Margot Simmons, HOA royalty, was egging my car like it was her high school rivals. I copied the footage onto a USB drive, printed stills, and made a neat little folder. I knew better than to confront her outright. Margot was the kind of woman who'd turn a simple question into a public hearing. So I waited. That weekend, Willow Creek had its monthly HOA meeting, and I showed up 15 minutes early. Margot was already there, rearranging chairs like she owned the place. When she saw me, her lips curled. "Preston," she said, "we really need to talk about your porch light. It's far too bright for—" I cut her off without raising my voice. "Actually, Margot, we need to talk about your nightly arts and crafts project on my car." Her smile froze. I walked up to the table and dropped the folder in front of the board president, a guy named Howard who always looked like he regretted retiring. Inside are 3 nights of footage. "Your vice president has been trespassing and vandalizing my vehicle." Howard opened the folder like it might explode. Margot let out a short laugh. "This is absurd. I don't even nope," I said. "Caught you right on camera, 2 angles, color footage. You even wore the same shoes you're wearing now." She looked down. "Big mistake." Everyone followed her gaze to the bright white sneakers with the neon green sole. "Exactly what she wore in the video." Howard blinked. Is this real?" I nodded. "I've already made copies. If this doesn't get addressed here, I'll be filing a police report first thing Monday." Margot's face flushed and she opened her mouth, probably to spin some ridiculous lie, but Howard raised a hand. "Margot, I think you should leave this meeting." For the first time in the 2 years I'd lived in Willow Creek, she didn't have a comeback. She just grabbed her clipboard and stormed out, muttering something about disrespect. But I wasn't done, not even close. By the following Tuesday, Margot's house looked darker than usual. No porch light, no movement behind the windows. Her prized rose bushes, which she usually trimmed every other day, had begun to wilt, but I wasn't about to let her vanish into silence like nothing happened. Not when she'd crossed a line most people don't even think to approach. I spent that morning at the local precinct. The officer at the desk raised an eyebrow when I handed over my folder of evidence. "You're telling me this woman is on the HOA board and she's the one doing this?" he asked, flipping through the stills. I nodded. "And it wasn't just once, it was 4 nights in a row. I've got timestamps, video, and a neighbor who saw her sneaking back into her yard with egg cartons. He's willing to give a statement." The officer leaned back in his chair. "You're in luck." She's already got an incident report on file, something about a dispute with a landscaper last spring. You wouldn't happen to know a guy named Ramon, do you? Tall guy, always wears a sun hat, I asked. That's the one. Claimed she tried to stiff him on payment and then dumped fertilizer over his truck bed. Case went nowhere since there wasn't enough evidence. Yours is different. He typed something into his computer, then turned the screen so I could see. We can file for a temporary restraining order. Given the pattern, the trespassing, and the vandalism, you've got a solid case, especially if she retaliates. She will, I said. She doesn't know how to stop. By Thursday, I had a court date. A judge reviewed the evidence in a closed hearing and signed off on a temporary order. Margot was prohibited from coming within 100 feet of my property, my vehicle, or me personally. I had a copy delivered to her that same evening. The next morning, I watched from behind my curtains as a county sheriff walked up her driveway and handed her the paper. She didn't even argue. Just stood there, her hands slightly trembling, lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned and shut the door hard enough for me to hear it 4 houses down. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But people like Margot don't go quietly. The following Sunday, I got a letter. Not a typed one, handwritten in blocky, angry letters, shoved through my mail slot without postage. I opened it cautiously. You may have the law on your side now, but you'll never belong here. People like you don't understand what this neighborhood is supposed to be. I stared at it for a long time. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. I called the officer I'd spoken to at the precinct. He told me to bring the letter in and that it would be added to the case file. When I arrived, he scanned the envelope and handed it off to the department's forensic technician. They were taking it seriously now. Between this and the restraining order, we're moving toward misdemeanor harassment. If she keeps pushing, it could become a felony. I walked out of the station feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. It wasn't over yet, but something had shifted. I wasn't just some guy with a weird neighbor anymore. I was the one drawing the line. Later that week, I got a visit I didn't expect. Howard, the HOA president, showed up at my door looking deeply uncomfortable. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He took a seat on the edge of my armchair as if unsure whether it would bite him. "I want to get ahead of this before it burns down the whole board. We had an emergency meeting without Margot. The rest of us are. Well, we're trying to figure out how to deal with this mess." "I assume you're not here to defend her," I said. He shook his head. "No, but I need to be honest. She's been operating unchecked for a long time, threatening residents, fining people for things that aren't even in the bylaws. Most of us just let her do her thing because it was easier than fighting her, but now that she's made it public." "She egged my car," I reminded him. He winced. "Yes." Listen, the board is voting on her suspension. We're looking at removing her entirely, but we need more than just your case. If you know anyone else who's had issues with her, real ones, we need them to come forward." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You want me to do your homework? I want to fix this before the whole HOA becomes a lawsuit magnet." I thought about it. I knew at least 3 other residents who'd complained about Margot's intimidation tactics. One woman had been fined for planting tulips that didn't match the color harmony of the neighborhood. Another got cited for having a political yard sign up one day past the supposed deadline. I still had their numbers. "I'll reach out," I said. By Sunday evening, I'd spoken to 5 neighbors. 4 of them agreed to submit written statements. One had a recorded voicemail where Margot threatened to make life complicated if they didn't repaint their shutters. I compiled everything into a folder and emailed it to Howard. Less than 48 hours later, the HOA board held a closed-door vote. Margot was suspended indefinitely, pending a formal review. But the real blow came the next morning. A city code enforcement vehicle pulled up in front of her house. 2 officials walked the perimeter with clipboards and cameras. Turns out, Margot had been operating a short-term rental out of her basement without a permit. A clear violation of zoning laws and something she'd fined other residents for even hinting at. The city slapped her with a steep fine and issued a cease and desist. I watched from my kitchen window as she argued with them on her porch, waving her arms wildly while trying to keep her voice down. It didn't work. One of the officers handed her a notice and turned to leave. She stood there, stunned, her carefully curated authority unraveling in real time. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the officer handling my case. Got the handwriting analysis back. That letter matches samples from our previous file on her. We've added it to the restraining order application. Judge approved a 1-year extension. It was quiet for a while after that. No more strange letters. No more eggs. For the first time since moving in, I could park my car without worrying about finding breakfast ingredients on the hood. But what really surprised me wasn't Margot's silence, it was the shift in the neighborhood. People started talking to each other more, sharing stories, comparing finds. One neighbor even joked about starting a Margot Survivors Club. We laughed, but the sentiment was real. 2 weeks later, a new notice went out from the HOA. They were overhauling several policies, including the fine structure and complaint process. Transparency was the new buzzword, and residents were invited to attend upcoming meetings with input on reform. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better, and Margot? Well, she'd been seen putting up a for sale sign, her name scribbled in faint marker on the bottom corner. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it just shows up piece by piece until silence feels like victory. The wind carried a strange calm through Willow Creek that week. For the first time in months, the air felt still, like the neighborhood had exhaled. But I knew better than to trust silence where Margot was concerned. People like her didn't vanish, they recalculated. 2 days after the city fined her for the illegal rental, I noticed a black SUV parked down the street. It wasn't one of the usual cars from around here, tinted windows, out-of-state plates. The vehicle sat idle for hours, engine off, no movement. By the 3rd day it returned, parking in a different spot each time. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. I walked next door to Nora's place. She was a retired private investigator who'd once done contract work for insurance fraud cases. We'd only spoken in passing before, but I figured if anyone could make sense of the SUV, it was her. She opened her door halfway, then stepped out onto the porch with a curious look. "Let me guess," she said. "Big black SUV, been circling the block. You've noticed it too." "Noticed it." I already ran the plates. Belongs to a property management firm based in Bellevue. They've got a reputation, mostly clean, but they represent some difficult clients. Someone's watching this street. And they're not doing it for fun. I told her everything I hadn't yet shared about the letter, the restraining order, the anonymous threats. She didn't blink. "She's not done," Nora said. "She's just passing the baton." "What do you mean?" "She's lost her authority, so she's outsourcing the harassment. Wouldn't be the first time someone in her position tried to maintain control through proxies." My stomach felt like it dropped half a floor. "What can we do?" She tapped her temple. "We document, we verify, and we expose. But if they cross a legal line, we bring in someone who hits harder than code enforcement." That night, I transferred all my security footage to a secure cloud account and added 2 more cameras, one on the back fence, the other inside the garage facing the driveway. Nora set up her own motion sensor on the east end of the block. I didn't ask how she had it. She didn't offer. 3 nights later, the cameras caught something new. A man in a gray hoodie walked along the sidewalk at 2 in the morning. He paused at the edge of my yard, stepped onto the grass for 2 seconds, then walked off. No eggs this time, no damage, just a silent, almost polite trespass, but it wasn't random. Nora confirmed that same man had been seen walking the perimeter of at least 4 other houses, all homes where residents had submitted complaints against Margot. That was enough. The next morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office and requested public records on the Willow Creek HOA. Specifically, I wanted financial filings, meeting minutes, and any documentation related to third-party contracts. It took me most of the afternoon, but what I found made my skin crawl. Over the past 18 months, Margot had authorized payments from the HOA's discretionary budget to a company labeled Civic Oversight Services LLC. The amount started small, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, but the totals added up to over $20,000. The description for the payments? Neighborhood compliance support. I looked up the business. It was a shell corporation, no website, no contact number. Registered to a P.O. box in Bellevue, the same city where the SUV was based. I took everything to Nora. She flipped through the copies, her jaw tightening. "This isn't just petty harassment anymore," she said. "If she funneled HOA funds into hiring people to intimidate residents, that's embezzlement. Possibly racketeering if she used it to establish control through fear." We brought the documents to the county's Public Integrity Unit. The detective assigned to our case, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Reeves, had already heard of Margot. "I've had her name cross my desk twice," Reeves said. "Nothing stuck until now. But this is substantial. You're telling me she used HOA money to fund a private intimidation campaign?" I nodded. "And we have the footage, the paper trail, witnesses." Reeves leaned back. "We're going to need to move quietly. If she realizes she's being investigated, she'll bury the rest of the evidence." Over the next week, Reeves coordinated a quiet inquiry. The county subpoenaed bank records, pulled HOA emails, and interviewed board members separately. I stayed out of it per her instructions, but Nora kept tabs through her network. Then one morning it happened. 2 unmarked cars rolled into Willow Creek just after sunrise. They parked outside Margot's house. A third vehicle, this one marked with the county seal, followed a minute later. Officers stepped onto her porch and knocked. She answered in a robe, hair unbrushed, eyes wide with confusion. They showed her the warrant. She said something no one could hear what, and then they stepped inside. Neighbors started gathering in driveways, watching quietly as officers carried out 2 laptops, a tablet, and a box of paper files. One officer placed a small evidence tag on a black flash drive. Another snapped photos of the garage interior. By mid-morning, Margot was escorted to the car in handcuffs. No one cheered. No one had to. That night, the board held a town hall meeting in the community center. Howard stood up at the front, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We're cooperating fully with the investigation," he said. "We've appointed an interim committee to manage operations while we conduct an internal audit. We don't yet know the full extent of the financial mismanagement, but it's clear serious mistakes were made." Someone asked if the HOA dues would be returned. Howard didn't answer right away. "We've frozen the discretionary fund. Once the audit is complete, we'll pursue restitution through the proper legal channels." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The other residents did it for me, one by one. Neighbors stood and described what they'd lived through. The fines. The threats. The sudden inspections. A woman in the back said she'd stopped letting her deaf son play in the front yard after Margot accused her of attracting attention. Another man revealed that he'd been billed $200 for lawn disorder after failing to edge his grass during a week. He'd been hospitalized. Each story chipped away at the myth of Margot's authority. Each one made it harder to believe this had ever been normal. A week later, the county filed charges: embezzlement, criminal misuse of organizational funds, conspiracy to commit harassment. The DA's office released a statement confirming that Margot had directed payments to Civic Oversight Services for unauthorized private security purposes, and that none of the expenditures had been approved by the full board. Her arraignment was set for the end of the month. Until then, she was under house arrest, prohibited from contacting any HOA members or setting foot on public HOA property. The SUV disappeared. The neighborhood changed again. This time, in ways no one expected, a group of residents formed an independent oversight committee. Nora volunteered to help draft new bylaws with built-in checks against unilateral spending. Howard stepped down, replaced by a younger woman named Priya who worked in nonprofit compliance. She announced open-door meetings, posted minutes online, and proposed a cap on fines, and me. I went back to my work, repainted the fence, planted a new hedge, but I left the cameras up, not because I expected trouble but because I knew that peace wasn't a gift. It was something you protected. Late one evening, Nora stopped by with a small envelope. Inside was a still from my own footage of Margot in the act, mid-throw, her face lit by the porch light. On the back, Nora had written in neat pen, proof. Because power unchecked is power abused. I set it on my desk and stared at it for a long while, not out of anger. Not even satisfaction, just clarity. Because in places like Willow Creek, justice didn't come in grand declarations or courtroom applause. It came in quiet, steady persistence. In watching. In documenting. In refusing to be bullied, and in never letting someone like Margot write the rules again. Detective Reeves called me just after 9 on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was sharper than usual but not rushed. She didn't waste time. "They found something," she said. "You're going to want to come in." I arrived at the precinct 20 minutes later, coffee forgotten on the passenger seat. The detective led me to a small conference room where a manila folder sat on the table next to a digital recorder and a thick stack of printed emails. She gestured for me to sit, then opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, annotated with highlighter markings and post-it notes. Civic Oversight Services wasn't just a front for neighborhood harassment, Reeves said. It was used to funnel money into a personal account, one that doesn't belong to Margot, at least not directly. I leaned forward. Who then? Reeves tapped a document. Her nephew, name's Douglas Vance. Lives in Bellevue. Registered the LLC under his name using a mail forwarding service. But he doesn't own a business license, and his financials show no declared income for the past 2 years. Until now. She handed me a printed image from a security camera Douglas at a local ATM, withdrawing cash with a debit card tied to the Civic Oversight account. They moved over $32,000 in total, she said. Some of it went to hardware purchases, vehicle rentals, and a few cash withdrawals that match the dates your cameras caught that SUV. I blinked. So it wasn't just about intimidating neighbors, they were laundering HOA money. Reeves nodded. And the DA's office is expanding the case. We're talking wire fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of community funds. The room felt colder all of a sudden, not from fear. From the weight of how deep it had gone without anyone noticing. They're issuing a warrant for Douglas today, she added. We're coordinating with Bellevue PD. I left the station with a copy of the new charges, my mind already turning over what this would mean for the neighborhood. I didn't get far before Howard called. We're holding a special vote, he said. A full recall of the board. The residents want a clean break. I didn't ask why he was still involved. I already knew. He was trying to undo the damage before it became the defining legacy of his retirement. I'll be there, I said. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, held in the community park instead of the usual sterile clubhouse. The turnout was overwhelming. Lawn chairs, picnic blankets, even a few people standing along the sidewalk. At least 70% of the neighborhood showed up. Priya stood at the front with a clipboard and a portable speaker. She didn't need to raise her voice. We're not here to shame anyone, she said. We're here to protect our homes. This vote is about restoring trust and giving the community a chance to decide who represents them. The ballot was simple. Yes or no, remove the current board and install an interim committee until a formal election in 60 days. The votes were counted on site, under the watch of 2 volunteer residents and a representative from the county's community liaison office. The result? Unanimous. Every single voter checked yes. Afterward, Priya approached me, still holding the clipboard. I know you didn't ask for this, Preston, she said. But we could use your help. People trust you. I hesitated. I'm not exactly a model volunteer. You're not. That's why you're perfect. You don't care about power. You care about truth. I agreed to serve on the interim committee if only until the new bylaws were finalized. Nora joined too, along with a soft-spoken schoolteacher named Lewis and a retired contractor named Darrell. Between the four of us, we had eyes on every corner of the neighborhood and no interest in maintaining old hierarchies. The next week, I received a subpoena not as a suspect but as a witness. Margot's case was moving into preliminary hearings, and the DA wanted my testimony to support the financial angle. I met with the assistant prosecutor in a plain office downtown. He was younger than I expected, but sharp, full of quiet energy and precise questions. He asked about the eggs, the cameras, the restraining order, and the SUV. Then he asked about the culture of the HOA. "Would you say there was a climate of fear?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but it wasn't dramatic, it was subtle. People did what she wanted because they didn't want to deal with the fallout. That's what makes her dangerous," he said. "Most people think corruption is loud. It's not. It's quiet. It's routine." Margot's hearing was closed to the public, but I heard from Reeves that she pled not guilty. Her attorney argued that she'd acted within her rights as a volunteer administrator, and that the financial irregularities were misunderstandings born of overzealous bookkeeping. The judge didn't buy it. Bail was denied. Flight risk. Douglas was arrested 2 days later in Bellevue, trying to withdraw just under $500 from a gas station ATM. He didn't resist. According to the report, he looked more embarrassed than afraid. The neighborhood moved on faster than I thought it would. With Margot out of the picture, people started repainting their homes without consulting anyone. Kids rode scooters down sidewalks without being stopped. A couple even installed a small swing in their front yard tree. No fines, no warnings, just life returning. At the next committee meeting, Priya brought up a proposal to dissolve the HOA entirely. "Do we really need it?" she asked. "Or has it become something we're just afraid to let go of?" Arguments followed, some practical, others emotional, but no one raised their voice. And in the end, the vote passed 4-0. We filed the paperwork with the county the following week. Willow Creek would transition to a voluntary neighborhood association focused solely on community events and shared resources. No fines, no enforcement, just neighbors. A month later, I got a letter in the mail, this one official, folded neatly in a stamped envelope. The state had approved the HOA's dissolution. Enclosed was a final balance sheet showing the remaining funds, just over $9,000, which had been allocated for park maintenance, and a new community library box. I went outside and stood at the edge of my lawn. The air was warm, sunlight filtering through the branches overhead. A kid zipped past on a skateboard. His shoelace was untied. No one stopped him. Across the street, Darrell was building a bench. Lewis waved from his driveway. Nora was walking her dog, pausing only to let it sniff a bush Margot would have written someone up for, and I felt it, not relief, not victory. Balance. The kind of balance that doesn't come from rules or inspections. The kind that grows when people realize they don't have to live under a microscope. That respect doesn't come from clipboards, but from how you treat people when no one's watching. I walked back inside and deleted the last of the old footage. The cameras stayed up, but the folder labeled HOA evidence was gone. That chapter was closed, and not because someone told us it was, because we chose to end it ourselves.